Any questions or comments?
That's right. Want to read the book now?
Perhaps you can mention where you go from here.
Yes, I mentioned earlier that the inspiration, I suppose, for the book came 30 years ago when I did that with Carter Army and Fred. This book, as you probably already realized, ends about 20 years before the Harvard Race of Fred. The Harvard Race of Fred started was to event in 1883. This book, as I said earlier, ends in 1861. So there was a period of relative peace after 1861, where the religions decided that we'd better settle down and try to get along. It was a tenuous peace at best, and it finally exploded again 20 years later with the Harvard Race of Fred. That's going to be my next book, I think. I've got much of the research done on it already. Got some of the writing done on it. But as I was telling Glenn Lewis on earlier, I got to pull up some loose ends, and I recently found out that since this book came out, I received a couple of emails. One, an interesting email by the name of Sharon from Harvard Race, and tells me that he's connected on both sides. He has Catholic ancestors who were present at the Harvard Race of Fred, and he has Orange ancestors who were in the Orange Parade. So yeah, he should probably have a few interesting stories to tell.
Dave, I'm sure in your research you found a connection between politics and religion. Yeah, could you elaborate on that?
Yes, actually, that's when Mike and I have been collaborating somewhat on some of the research. Mike, in his book here, before I go on, I want to put another plug in for you now, Mike. Mike was kind enough to lend me some information that he found. One of the chapters in my book is about the murder of Isaac Mercer, supposedly by Catholic monks here in Riots. Mike also treats that in his book and goes into quite a bit of detail about it. But getting back to Mike's question, back in the 150 years ago, I can remember, and probably most everybody here, when you were in grade 6 or 7, I can remember the history book. In 1832, we received representative government, and in 1855, we got responsible government. And we heard about William Carson, and we heard about some of the other people. But all you learned were dates and names, nothing more. Nobody ever talked about strife that self-government brought in. Nobody talked about the trouble between Catholics and Protestants as a result of the election strife. Because back in those days, if you were a Roman Catholic, you were encouraged to vote what was then called Reform. Today we call it Liberal. And you were encouraged that way because the Roman Catholic citizenry at that time tended to be the lower class working people, lower working class people. There were very few rich Roman Catholics. Most of the merchants were Protestant, were not Roman Catholic. So they were encouraged by their priests to vote Reform. On the other hand, Protestants were encouraged to vote Conservative. And of course, on election day, up she goes. And almost from 1832 till 1861, there was a period in between. We got what they call amalgamated assembly, when the British government finally suspended our constitution and the right to govern ourselves for a period of about 6 years. But other than that, almost every election there was strife and some type of rioting, either in Carbonair or Harvard Race or St. John's, sometimes in all places. But it is interesting, and after 1861, one of the reasons I think that it kind of died out a lot was we were talking about confederation with Canada. Remember, Canada formed a country in 1867, and we were invited to go to send representatives to the initial talks. And we had people on both sides, liberals slash Catholic, conservative slash Protestant, who were either for or against confederation. So you tended to have a bit of an amalgamation that didn't exist before that. So that was one of the reasons that the strife between the religions during elections tended to be a little bit less after 1861.
Could you talk a little bit about any influence Coughlin had, Harvard Grace on attention
Any influence?
and Lawrence Coughlin?
No, I didn't come across anything on Lawrence Coughlin. Lawrence Coughlin was a Methodist minister. I guess he was one of the first Methodist ministers in Newfoundland.
Yes.
I wasn't able to come across anything that he specifically was involved in. He probably was. Have you been able to come across anything yourself?
No, it's just that he was a person of interest and contemporary Wesley and so on.
Yeah.
That, he would have,
Yeah.
his whole mode of operation would have been disturbing.
Yeah. As a result of my research, I'm of the opinion, and I think most people would agree, that in the early years of government, the Roman Catholic clergy were far more involved in politics than the Protestant clergy tended to be. And the reasons for that were a number. There were a number of reasons. One of them was probably the fact that if the Protestants tended to vote conservative, and most powerful people in the community were conservative or were Protestants, like your wealthy merchants, well, why was there a need for the clergy to get involved in the first place? Right? Remember, the Catholic people wanted change, so their clergymen tended to get more involved in politics at the time than their Protestant counterparts.
They were also from Ireland.
Oh yes, yeah.
They had
Yeah.
political.
That's right. I mentioned that in the book as well. Thank you for remembering, Gary. Most of the Roman Catholic clergy, if not all of the Roman Catholic clergy up until the mid-1800s, came over from Ireland. And of course, when they came over from Ireland, they brought their feelings with them. And we all know of the history of Ireland, the occupation of the English over there for hundreds of years, and the animosity that existed over there probably up till the very day today. So when Irish Catholic priests came to Newfoundland and saw the same conditions almost reflected here, they became very politically involved. Okay?
There's, in that period, right after this book ends, you say things were a little bit quiet. Something happened that changed things. You talk about this new organization. We had the UIS. Now we have a new organization show up.
Oh, you mean, yes. Bishop Fleming, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Newfoundland, for a period of time in the 1830s and 40s, and a number of Irish politicians who were living here in Newfoundland often talked about the presence of the Orange Lodge here in Newfoundland, or blamed people or accused certain political figures of being Orangemen. And in fact, they weren't. There was no Orange Lodge in Newfoundland until 1863. After the arrival of the Orange Lodge became fairly quickly became a prominent organization within many of the larger communities around Newfoundland. Within 10 years, there were like 11 or 12 lodges in the larger communities around. And that put an added stress upon what had tended to become a little bit of a peace within Newfoundland society. Many of the people started to wonder about the existence now and the presence of this, as I said in the book, potentially dangerous organization. A lot of people thinking, how could we're trying to get along now, how can we get along with this organization coming in and rallying the cry of Protestantism and attracting a lot of Protestants under the orange flag? And that's really what happened at the Harbour Grace Affray. The Harbour Grace Affray was a clash between the Orangemen of Harbour Grace and the surrounding communities and the Catholic men of River Gate. During what we today call Boxing Day, it happened on Boxing Day in 1883. In the old days, we used to call it St. Stephen's Day. Alrighty, Gary. I'd say we'll have something to eat.
I think I said earlier that David's success as a teacher is because he taught history by telling stories, and I think he's demonstrated that here tonight. So thank you. We have Lois and her staff have books for sale down here. David will be over here to my left at a table signing, and in the middle, great feast. David and Corinne, the family, have brought along food, and Flicker has brought along some food. So stay around, have a chat, and say have a cup of tea.
I've been putting plugs in all night, so I've got to put one in for the wife now. There. She baked a fine carrot cake.
So, yes. Don't go away.
Doing the same thing as us.
Oh, you're getting the sunset. You can take a picture for us. Okay, Bill, you got to take a picture for me.
Why, you too short?
No, of Austin. Oh,
You're
still hitchhiking.
That's rough.
You got the hitchhikers in there?